What is it you want, Barry? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dying times here.
Come with me if you want to live.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
The Force will be with you, always.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to 20th Century Geek. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and today I'm going to be standing alone. You could say that I'm going to be standing up. I'm going to be giving you some truths about the world. Well, let's be honest, I'm not. I'm going to be regurgitating some truths from somebody else. But I am stood here alone, and this is the Patreon choice for this quarter. It's running a little late. That's because of holidays, work, and, well, the world is bonkers, let's be honest. And so the poll was put out there, and I wanted to do something not comedic. I'm not the funniest guy. I'm not going to start spouting jokes. But I wanted to sort of cover off comedy. It's not something that we've done a great deal of on 20th Century Geek. So I put a poll out, and I put out 3 names that the top tier Patreon guys could choose from. I'm not going to go through all of them because those choices will come up again and I don't want to spoil it. But the choice was made. And we're going to take today, I'm going to talk to you about a comic who has a very strong cult status, was ahead of the curve in many, many ways, saw what was coming, didn't give a fuck about what the world was going to be, but in many ways has also been forgotten. He was big in the UK for a short time, and unfortunately he passed away in February 1994 from cancer. And in that time, since then, he has had an undulating notoriety. I'm talking today about American comedian Bill Hicks.
Where have I been? I've been on my flying saucer tour. Which means, like flying saucers, I too have been appearing in small southern towns in front of a handful of hillbillies lately. No one doubts my existence. Yeah, I've noticed a certain anti-intellectualism going around this country, man, ever since around 1980. Coincidentally enough. I was in Nashville, Tennessee last week, and after the show I went to a Waffle House, right? And I'm sitting there and I'm eating and I'm reading a book. I don't know anybody, I'm alone. I'm eating and I'm reading a book. And this waitress comes over to me. What you reading for? I said, wow, I've never been asked that. Not what am I reading, but what am I reading for? Well, God damn it, you stumped me. I guess I read for a lot of reasons, but the main one is so I don't end up being a fucking waffle waitress.
Bill Hicks, as I say, born December 16th, 1961, died February 26th, 1994, and in that time he reached a level of fame that was limited, if I'm more, in all honesty. He's an interesting guy, he's an interesting character, and one of the reasons I laud him for his work is the fact that to him stand-up comedy was the end goal. You see a lot of stand-up comics, especially American stand-up comics, and it's a sort of a stepping stone. You know, it's another rung on the ladder to something else, to something bigger, something better, whether they get a TV show or whatever. I mean, think of, you know, everyone from Jerry Seinfeld through to what's his name, James Corden doing the Late Show, those sort of things. All those people, comedians, whether they be stand-up or what, use it to get to the next song. I mean, what was it? Everybody Loves Raymond. You know, those sorts of actors. They want to get a sitcom or something else. Not Bill Hicks. To Bill, it was all about. I'll call him Bill. I will call him Bill, whatever. But in this, even though I never met him, wasn't my friend, but to Bill, it seems that that was you know the end. All he wanted is he had a vision, he had a world view, and he wanted people to wake up and see what he saw, and he was going to convey it in the most comedic yet aggressive way. We'll get onto that when we get into his shows later on, but let's start looking at why. Because Bill Hicks is an interesting guy in that he moved around a lot as a kid. and he eventually settled in Texas at the age of 7 with his family. His family, mother, father, a couple of siblings, led a very sort of quiet existence. There's nothing hugely, of notoriety about them. The mother and father were quietly religious. Yet they weren't evangelicals, but they were probably more religious than not religious. They went every Sunday. But the idea for them was very much like, you go every Sunday, you keep your head down, you do the right thing, and you carry on. It wasn't going to be all about, the crosses and, to the letter of the Bible thing. But there was a goodness to them. That was the intent. It was almost like, we're going to edge our bets a little bit, maybe. And so it's interesting because both his mother and father are like that, and it came up later on. I mean, I've already sworn once on this, and he was quite a sweary gentleman. But the thing with Bill is, profanity, again, was just a part and parcel of his act. It wasn't there to shock. It wasn't there to think. It was just who he was. And one example is his dad. I'd say confront him sounds too strong, but his dad once questioned him and said, "Well, Bob Hope doesn't use swear words and profanity." And Bill responds by saying, "Well, Bob Hope doesn't do the fucking venues that I do." It was clear that there was a conflict in there of sort of worldview. One of the things I've always said in the world, and I believe this quite strongly, is there are two types of people. Like, there are bubble people, and there are sort of world people. Okay, and bubble people feel very secure in their bubble, and the bubble can be smaller, it can be a bit larger, but they very much like to be in their bubble, and they find some form of protection in that. And I won't say that's religion, in some cases it is, but sometimes it can be very close family, and it's sort of like becoming incredibly tribal about a town or a block or whatever, but they have very much a bubble perspective, like this is their world. People have those same attributes, but can be world people, and they will go out and they will experiment, and they will question, and they will be curious, and they will educate themselves and push the boundaries. And it seems, when I think about this, that Bill's family, at least his parents, were bubble people. They liked the small living, it's secure, it's that white picket fence. This is the American dream to an extent. Well, Bill was willing to question that and say, why? Why the fuck have I got to get up every day, go to work to a job I don't like, to be told off by a boss that, clearly doesn't like me and just wants me to do all their work? Why should I be doing that when there are things going on in the world that are horrendous and need to be sort of pointed out? Why should I stand by and let this happen? So there are anecdotal stories of him as a kid literally confronting his parents about this. But he was never disrespectful. It was always done probably in the most respectful way, but it was to say, like, look, this is your worldview, but I do not share that.
I did that joke in Alabama. These 3 rednecks met me after the show. "Hey, buddy, come here. Hey, Mr. Comedian, come here." Yeah, I love that move. "Come here." Not a physics major. I think that's a safe bet. "Mr. Funny Man, come here." "Hey, buddy, we're Christians. We don't like what you said." I said, "Then forgive me." Later, when I was hanging from the tree.
And I think a part of that worldview comes from his love of comedy. As a child, he really was a big lover of comedy. Maybe got into the comedy too young. It's one of those things, not to get into comedy, because things can be funny, but getting into adult comedy maybe too young. I mean, he was inspired by, born in 61 and sort of early 70s. In his pre-teens and teens, he's inspired by like Woody Allen, Richard Pryor, and these guys are sort of doing quite sophisticated comedy, regardless of how their other things, especially Woody Allen. Their comedy and sensibilities are incredibly sort of adult and sophisticated. Yet as a kid, he's still being inspired by those. He was trying to write these things. He was trying to sort of like understand how this works. It's funny. There's a British comedian called Tony Hancock. We might speak about him one day. Did Hancock's Half Hour and all those other things. Played like the grumpy sort of chap. And one of the things he died in depression and desperation because he could never understand why people found him funny. And this is, a real sort of overview of it. But he never understood why people found him funny. And the more he looked into it, the less he understood it. And it really confused him. And I think like you can see that Bill was getting to that point as well. Where he's like, why is this work? Why are these things funny? And it seems that once he sort of gets into the swing of it, he seems to throw that away and just go with what he knows.
This guy makes $100,000 a year. So he's always. You never say hello. You're always running around. Just can't you sit down for a while and say hello? What's going on, Dad? Say hello. Say, where's that good home cooking? You know, you sit up in your room all night and listen to that rock music. You know why they call it rock music, Bill? Sounds like you're hitting two rocks together and they're rolling down a hill with cans. I can be funny too. As soon as you get your own place and your own apartment, you can do as you mighty well hoo-ha please. As long as I'm the one paying the bills, you're going to be miserable.
When he gets to high school, he meets one of his best friends, a guy called Dwight Slade, who was also very much into comedy and music, and the two sort of seem to really hit it off. They're very close. But more than that, they share a spirit of challenging. This idea that, like, you know, the world's there to be challenged, so let's challenge it. They wrote things together, and they would do what can only be considered guerrilla comedy skits, in which they would sort of appear out of nowhere in the school or other places where their friends and the people they knew would hang out. They would do a comedy bit and then disappear. Like, leave people laughing and just disappear. And it was this idea of sort of the spontaneity of this comedy. And as we were getting older, you can see this is in the air. I mean, you know, it's great to hear this because this would have been in the 70s and early 80s, but it seems like, you know, I can imagine Bill at this stage at least. I mean, he was still young. Like, you know, this is still like, you know, if this is the 70s, this is him in his early teens in high school. But you can see that same spirit and anarchic, you know, sensibilities in sort of like early SNL and the Canadian equivalent. So you're talking like Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, and that crew of people, Chevy Chase, that were really just pushing the bounds of comedy and trying to do something different, that alternative take on comedy. But living in sort of Houston, Texas, there was nowhere really for Bill to go. And so he would do his bits and pieces wherever he could. And on one apparently sort of Bible camp, which again, the irony isn't lost when you consider his later sort of sensibilities, he did a comedy bit. He literally stood up as a young teenager, 12, 13, 14 years old, and did a comedy bit to the campsite members. And the first his parents heard of it was when the Baptist minister, sort of responded back with, "Your son's hilarious. It's my parishioners think he's the funniest thing around." And so they weren't willing to put him down or willing to sort of like back him into a corner or anything. They sort of allowed it to grow, believing that it was a good outlet. And it was. It clearly is. I mean, it allowed him to vent his frustrations. You know, but really in the area, like, you know, they thought this was going to be doing like talent shows or maybe some bits at the church or something like that. That was the idea. And it wasn't until sort of like something happened, something accidental, like these little coincidences happen, and we start to realise that Bill is destined for bigger things and also isn't scared. And the one things I seem to applaud Bill Hicks for is his bravery, constantly throughout his career. Like, he is a man that basically stands up for what he believes in, but also just does stuff. He's born in sort of December, a Sagittarius. I know I'm not really into that, but I'm a Sagittarius too, so I can sort of empathise and sort of like see a fellow Sagittarian in this sort of like, no, I'll do that. That sounds like a good laugh. It's got me into trouble on numerous occasions. But the thing is, he actually he were driving along, they'd been out, and him and Dwight and some other friends were out. This is, I think it must have been 16, 17, 18. No, 16, 17, I think it is. And they're driving along, and they see a place called the Comedy Workshop in Houston. It's a new comedy club, okay? Hasn't been open long, but it's getting to have some established comedians there. And this was when he was 17 in 1978. And he and Dwight just go, yeah, we're going to do that. We're going to go in there and we're going to do a bit and we're going to do this and we're going to do a double act. And they did. And they stood up in front of comedians that had probably been doing this for 10, 15 years. These guys have been professionals and were willing to put, their balls on the line, really, to say, look, take us serious. And they did. They respected this kid to stand up. And they did some double act stuff. But then Bill started to do a solo act. And he did a very observational sort of humour. Very much around his lifestyle, but it was still poking fun. You could see that he was like an outsider looking in. Even at that point, at 17 and 18, he was still an outsider looking in at this sort of provincial America. And, the crazy Americana of that time. And looking at it and going like, how quaint it is. And he would rip on things like his family and sort of like, a little bit of religion and the people of Houston and this notion of bubble people and world people. Like that seems to fit again into his sort of sphere of humour. But it was never aggressive at this point. It was ribbing rather than punching someone in the face, which is sort of at one point it can become. But this was consistent. Like he was working on a regular basis. He was sneaking out of the house and was doing this on a regular basis, a weekly basis. He was going along and doing this, and people were seeing him, and his parents didn't know, which is amazing because no one was reporting back.
I'm sure he got that from my father too. My father's one of these guys who tries to make everything a learning experience when I was real small. It was like tragic. I used to go, Dad, can I have $5 so me and John could start a lemonade stand? He'd go, well, if I give you the $5, Bill, as an investor, fuck it, Dad. I don't want to hear that shit today, man. I just want some lemonade,
And so this is, the early sort of 80s. By the time he's been doing it for a year or two, he then calls on his brother, and who's at college by this point, and says, you need to come down and see what I'm doing. And his college old brother, I think he's 2 years older than him, literally comes down, sits in the audience and is thinking like, what am I going to see? Is my brother going to be making a fool of himself? Am I going to have to get him off the stage? And then he comes on and does his act, and these adults are laughing with him, not at him, as a stand-up comedian. He is taking them on that ride. The sort of one of the things I'm always like in awe of with really good professional stand-up comedians is their ability to take someone on a journey and hold a crowd enthralled and tell them jokes and stories, and that's what he does. Anyway, it sort of gets back to his parents. They're a little disapproving, but they don't stop it. There is a bit of a thing of like, look, he's been doing it for a while now. He's going to be 18. We can't really stop him from doing it. But he's starting to get a bit of a name for himself. And so he decides that he and Dwight, they're not going to go to college. They're not going to do that sort of thing. They're going to move to New York. And he does. He uproots, takes his stuff, and he goes to New York. And they start to write a screenplay. So they're doing gigs when they're in New York. And he is writing a screenplay. And the screenplay is very much based on his comedy. So at this point, he and Dwight in particular, have got that regular vision in mind. This idea of like, we'll do stand-up comedy and then we'll use our bits and put them into a script, and we can then get a film or a sitcom or something like that, and then that's just up to the big leagues. That was clearly the intention. And it doesn't quite work out. The script apparently is relatively good. It gets shipped around a little bit in New York, and people sort of go, yeah, it's a good first draft, and hand it back, not knowing that this is actually about the 15th or 16th draft, and that they become a little bit disparaged by that, to the extent of actually, while Dwight continues to try and write and tweak the script, Bill just gives up. He realises that isn't really where his heart is, and he continues to do the stand-up. But at this point, he's actually sort of beginning to explore other things. Like, he's becoming a lot more aware of not just America but the world, living in New York, he's exposed to a whole bunch of new things, different people, different sensibilities, different cultures. And one of the things he does is, during this time, some of his friends are are tearaways. Not tearaways is probably the wrong word, but they're experimental. They're drinking, they do sort of like recreational drugs and all this other stuff. Bill's pretty much sort of like straight-laced, and doesn't really do a great deal. Doesn't drink, doesn't really do drugs, has dabbled with smoking at this point, but not really done anything. And it's not until sort of a point when he's in New York, he goes back home and goes to his friend's ranch and does mushrooms, as in shrooms, the hallucinogenic shrooms. And this experience is almost like a left turn. It's a hard left turn for Bill, in that this experience he carries with him for the rest of his life, the next sort of 10 years, because this is sort of early 80s. And he has this experience of a great white light, of some interstellar, interdimensional sort of intelligence giving him this information that basically says, it's all right. It's nuts, isn't it? Everything's crazy, but it's all right. Because, there is no death. You are all one being. You are all one intelligence, and you can do better, and you can do this, and you can do that. And after it, like, he wakes up the next morning, and, hangover, most probably. But he's had this experience, and it fucks with his head. And he starts to integrate this with his comedy.
It's interesting. Isn't it interesting that two drugs that are legal, alcohol and cigarettes, two drugs that do absolutely nothing for you whatsoever, and drugs that grow naturally upon this planet, drugs that open your eyes up to make you realize how you're being fucked every day of your life, those drugs are against the law. Wow. Coincidence? I don't know. I'm sure their motives are pure, but and I'm glad they're against the law. 'Cause you know what happened when I took them? I laid in a field of green grass for 4 hours, going, my God, I love everything. The heavens parted, God looked down and rained gifts of forgiveness onto my being, healing me on every level, psychically, physically, emotionally. And I realized our true nature is spirit, not body, that we are eternal beings, and God's love is unconditional, and there's nothing we can ever do to change that. It is only our illusion that we are separate from God or that we are alone. In fact, the reality is we are one with God, and He loves us. Now, if that isn't a hazard to this country, you see my point.
Unfortunately, it has a detrimental effect. Whilst he's expanding, he has the frustrations of performing, and it's regular. He's doing 6 nights a week, and it starts to really wear on him. And whilst he's sort of doing these dive gigs, he is getting some notoriety. He's appearing on some of the late shows, and he's doing being booked on like comedy specials and comedy tours and sort of stuff. But not headlining stuff yet. By sort of like 87, he's really sort of beginning to find his way, and he's been on sort of certain shows, but he's not the name, that wasn't the marquee name. That's the one I'm thinking of. That sort of comes. But what happens is once he's in New York, he's done drugs, he starts to drink, and this frustration and the repetition of it, like, he starts to just want to fight. He's looking for a vent because he sort of seems to be in a rut, and unfortunately he gets a reputation not as a great comedian but as a great drinker. He smokes regularly, and he will then start to go on stage and people will buy him drinks. Like, the other comedians will come out and send a beer up, or someone in the audience will send him a shot, or these things, and he gets drunker and drunker, and he gets more angry and more aggressive, and the act becomes more akin to it becomes the later Bill Hicks, but is alcohol fueled. There are moments where it'll be funny, and he'll be talking about his usual stuff, about sort of politics or the use of recreational drugs. He's moving into that. He's moved away from the softer stuff around poking fun at America, and then it becomes into a rant. And it wasn't until there was a show that his brother goes up to New York to see, and basically Bill just gets to a point in the stage where he just sort of literally is lying on the floor just shouting at people in the audience and making noise. And his brother's like, okay, we need to do something. Like, this is a moment in history that could either make or break my brother. Like, he's got to stand up and deal with this, or he's going to die. And his brother confronts his friends and stuff in New York, and especially Dwight, who has come and gone, and says, like, well, why hasn't anything really happened about this? And, you know, then it all comes out, really, that it's part of the lifestyle. This is how they roll. This is how it all happens. And so it's become more and more of a problem, but because it's been incremental, you know, the toad in the hot water analogy, like, it wasn't dropped in it, it's just grown over the last 2-3 years. No one's really done anything about it because it's been funny to watch. But what they realise is it's been funny to watch this guy crash and burn. And so they do. They take him in and they sort of have an intervention to an extent. And he goes and he joins AA. However, that doesn't sort of stop the use of sort of hallucinogens. But, you know, he basically doesn't really use drugs anymore. There's a couple of times, but his mind has already been opened. But he does. He steps away, takes some time out, knowing he's got to repair his reputation. And has a think about where he is in his career. And this is around 88. And he does. He dries out. He gets clean, and he stays alcohol free for the rest of his life. You know, until 1994 when he passes away. But there's something new about the Bill that returns, an energy and an eagerness and a sort of an urgency that things need to be dealt with, and so that's what we now get. Gone is the Bill that was sort of poking fun at the sort of provincial home and you know, white picket fenced America. And now comes a Bill that is sort of like stood there saying, America is the real problem in the world. Like, as an American, I love America, but I also see that there's a problem. You know, I'm standing here and saying, I'm looking at the news and I'm watching the sort of the military, that these huge, you know, high up military officials asking for more money, and then sort of, you know, talking about the sort of the moral certainty of certain military acts, but telling you, no, there is no moral certainty. You are hired killers.
You never see my attitude in the press. That's what bugs me. You never see my point of view. For instance, gays in the military. Now, I don't know how y'all feel about it. Gays want to be in the military. Here's how I feel about it. All right? Anyone dumb enough to want to be in the military should be allowed in. End of fucking story. That should be the only requirement. I don't care how many push-ups you can do. Put on a helmet, go wait in that foxhole. We'll tell you when we need you to kill somebody. You know what I mean? I'm so sick. I've watched these fucking congressional hearings and all these military guys and all the pundits seriously, the esprit de corps will be affected and we are such a moral... Excuse me, aren't y'all fucking hired killers? Shut up! You are thugs, and when we need you to go blow the fuck out of a nation of little brown people, we'll let you know. Until then... Where did the fucking military get all these more? We are the military. Is that a village of children and kids? Where's the neighbor? I don't want any gay people hanging around me while I'm killing kids. I just don't want to see it. Don't tell me this military protects our freedom. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, there ain't no one out there who's a fucking threat to us, okay? They don't exist. I'm talking now only of countries we don't arm first. All right? If you want to split hairs, you got a point. Bill, what about the nations we sell arms to and then go blow the fuck out of them? Okay, they might be scary for about a day. We give them the old weapons, we use the new ones on them, you know. Fucking Iraq found that out, huh? You have the Scud, we have the Patriot. The Scud times 2, you fucks! Just keep selling them the shitty shit, you know. They'll fight the next week, they'll have muskets. America won a war with this. Yeah, 100 years ago. We got new shit now. Fuck. What is that? It's musket repellent. I can kill you by looking at you.
Like, he's the one that was willing to say this, and this is before like the first Gulf War. You know, this is where during the sort of the end of the rah Reagan era, the height of that sort of like super patriotic America, and he's turning around and saying, no, it's garbage. Go back to sleep, America. You know, you just carry on looking the other way. Be distracted by American gladiators while your government goes and bombs a bunch of people or segregates off this or does that. Like, he's the kind of person that was willing to do that, but he does it as an act, and it's incredibly good. It's this is where he starts to get his notoriety, because all of a sudden he's something different, and not just the news media, but entertainment media sort of starts to take notes, and he gets booked more and more, and he starts to get a real name. But the problem is he'll never break through a certain glass ceiling in America because of his sentiments, because of the fact he is actually stood there saying, not that America's evil, that's never his point, because he will admit that he loves it, but that you have the right, nay the obligation, to point out a country's flaws, then deal with them. So the news media, he says, quite one of the strongest things he sort of says is, why is it we've got the war on drugs? Why is it that every news story about drugs is a negative story? Why is it you always hear about some kid who sort of takes LSD and acid and then goes and jumps off a building because they thought they could fly? The tragic death. And he's like, it's not tragic. It's one more moron killed. You don't see birds, not all birds jump off a building. Try and take off from the floor. He was willing to push. It's one of the things I enjoy most is one of his early shows, Sane Man. Was an hour. It's an hour. No, it's not, just shy of an hour. A special that he recorded, or had someone recorded for him at the Comedy Workshop in Houston, and he's laying some of this stuff out, and you can hear in the audience the laughter, and there's still people going, they don't know whether it's a laugh or not, whether this is serious or they should be, looking at themselves, or is this a joke? They don't know. And I kind of like that uncomfortableness. But what it meant is sort of in those late 80s, 88, 89, 90, he struggled like mad. He would tour constantly and would report back, this idea of sort of going into a diner, reading a book, and someone stopping up and going what are you reading for? And he's like, well, not being asked what am I reading, but what am I reading for? This anti-intellectualism in America sort of clearly angered him, and also this sort of aggressive religiosity that sort of was permeated throughout America. This sort of righteous Christianity, where he would say all these things, and he would question them and confront them with these things. And he also has a bit where he talks about some guys stopping him outside of a club, and it's true, this has happened. He stopped him and sort of they pushed him into a corner and sort of said, "We don't like what you said, buddy. We're Christians and we don't like it." His response is well, as Christians, then forgive me. That's your morality, not mine. That's what you're supposed to do. You can't be angry with me. Your sort of moral outrage is ridiculous in this case. I'm sorry, forgive me. And he put up a mirror to America and said, have a good look at yourself. Have a good look at what's going on. This is an era when we had the Iran-Contra deal. We'd had all these other things going on in the States and during the 80s. And he was like, don't celebrate yourself, because we're no better than some of these nations that we go and bomb the fuck out of. And so he hit a brick wall. So in 1990, 91, he hits a real brick wall. There's no way he's going to go any further. They don't want to put him on sort of he's never going to get a sitcom. He's never going to get a film. He's happy doing the touring, but he can't get beyond that. He's never going to be doing gigs. And something happens. He travels to the Edinburgh Festival. And he wins an award at the Edinburgh Festival 1991. And all of a sudden, a country embraces him. And his cynical, anarchic humour lands, and he starts travelling the UK, and all of a sudden, like, he takes off. And this is a country that, you know, I'm a Brit, I'm from the UK, I know how it plays in this country. This is a country that sort of had things like The Young Ones, Spitting Image. We've already had people like Billy Connolly sort of telling us. We've had, you know, Ben Elton, Alexis Sale, these comedians sort of like, you know, we produced Armando Antonucci, you know, we've had sort of all these. We are willing more than ever to look at ourselves and go, yeah, you're a bit of a prick, like to our governments or even to ourselves. And all of a sudden, this guy, this American stand-up, been doing the same, and we're like, well done, congratulations. And we loved him, and he went over in the States, and you can see him again appearing, he tours, and he appears on several good. Like, one of the weird things is you can see this happen. He appears on like shows when he's been booked because they're like, "Oh, this guy's getting some notoriety. It's time we got him on the show." Unfortunately, they're not entirely sure what they're getting, and so when they get Bill Hicks and he starts to say a couple of things, you can see the uncomfortableness of the presenters. There's a great one. It's on the internet. It's on YouTube. Go find it. Bill Hicks on Good Morning Britain. From way back in the late 80s. I can't remember who the host is. But she sort of questions him a couple of things, and he starts to lay out these things, and it's just hilarious to hear her response, because she does not know what to do with herself. She's a bit sort of struck, you know, by what he has to say, and that's always going to be the case. But the mainstream audiences really enjoyed him, and this sort of culminated in a performance that's available. It's on Prime actually at the moment, but it's available on DVD, and it's almost like the pinnacle of his career. It's a show called Revelations, 1992, and it was filmed in London, and he walks on stage as a sort of like, it's wonderfully the way it's done. It's got a little intro of him on a horse. You know, he's a Texan at heart, really. So it's him on a horse riding through this sort of desolate landscape, and then finally, sort of like a back part of the stage opens, and it's this silhouette of a cowboy. Like, he's got the cowboy hat, a long sort of duster on, and that sort of thing. And that's what he is. He's like an outlaw. Like, you know, he is this American comedian outlaw there to tell it as it is. And you then get this sort of like 70 minutes of riotous, pummeling humour. You know, some of it, I will admit, hasn't aged well. But even if Bill was around today, you would be I can see him stood to be like, I don't give a fuck. I said it in 1992. It's still valid. You know, yeah, I probably, you know, there's some gay bashing is probably the wrong word, but there's a little bit of homophobia in there. There's a little bit of misogyny, but it's still sort of like the points are valid. I mean, one of the most amazing things is that when he does this show, it's sort of like just after the Los Angeles riots, you know, so he's sort of been around, been touring, and goes back, and he's sort of like, America is starting to change. And that's why, again, it seems relevant today, because some of the stuff he talks about, this notion of police brutality and the corruption of these things, like, you look at it, I'm listening to a guy in 1992. You know, this is almost like, it was 18 years ago. And he's speaking a truth that is still hurting us today. And that's what's baffling to me, that no one was listening then. Don't really think they're listening now, but there's still going to be some, you know, noise about it. It's wonderful. The show is amazing, and it's well worth seeing. It is the pinnacle of his sort of like, you know, where Eddie Murphy had like Raw, and you see these other comedians got stand-up shows that are so good. This is quintessential Bill Hicks. It's him riding the wave, him as like a rock star comedian, and I recommend you track it down because he is absolutely outstanding. Unfortunately, that's sort of the end of the line, and it's so tragic because he then goes quiet. He still tours, definitely. You know, he's still touring, and does all these, you know, bits and pieces. Appears on a couple of shows, but it's like you can tell. You know, people say around him, there was anecdotal stuff that said, yeah, it was like he was making peace with the world. You know, he obviously come to something, but he was fighting, and he'd been diagnosed with cancer. Now, he didn't let anybody really know. He kept it as quiet as possible within a sort of very tight circle, and intended to do something about it. So he fought it, he had chemotherapy and all the other bits and pieces. Still taught, carried on going, until eventually it was determined that it was incurable. Nothing more could be done. And so he does his final show, and it's recorded, it's on YouTube, it's there to be found, his final show, and he actually stands up and he admits to the audience, one of the first things he says, basically sort of like, you know, thank you very much for the applause and everything, but I'm going to say this is my last ever show. After tonight I will not be touring again. This is my retirement show. And it's only like some dingy club. This isn't like, you know, a big hall or an arena or anything like that. This is a dingy club, and he's given it as his farewell address. And it's really sad to see. It's still a good show, but it's still really sad to see. And then he went quiet, and he basically went around and met his friends. They did one more sort of like shroom session out at the ranch with his friends. And then he sort of returns home to his parents, and that's where he passes away in 1994. And the world learns about it. And in some ways, in some cases, there's a bit of a shrug. Like, oh, tragic. And it is tragic. It's more than tragic. It's one of those things where, you know, the good die young. He was 32 when he died, and you know, this notion of, you know, being taken, and I'm not religious, but you know, there's a documentary, American, the Bill Hicks story, that's again well worth watching. In fact, it's more than well worth watching. It's I would suggest it's mandatory. Really watch it. It's not just a good story of Bill Hicks. It's a really well done documentary. But some of the stories now, you know, you get people saying, you know, well, he's up there with Jesus now, and I'm sure he's telling them what to do, and you know, or him and Jesus are bantering, blah blah blah. And there's part of me thinks, but he had a mission statement. Like, you know, the world wasn't ready for him then. He should have had longer. Like, he needed longer. Like, there was a time he could have, you know, he could have done more. And so I'm not religious. I don't believe he was taken for a purpose. I think it's just a tragedy that he's cancer. And I think that, you know, he has, with time, his star, you know, that cult star has faded somewhat. But he still stands up. I was introduced to him by accident, really, because a friend of mine years ago, sort of early 2000s, I'd been at university, come back from university, and a woman that I knew, we were talking about comedy around a friend's house. I was talking about Billy Connolly and Jack D and some of the ones I really liked. And she said, "Oh, you need to watch this DVD I've got called Totally Bill Hicks." And it's a compilation of some of his stuff. And then she also told me, "Oh, you need to check out Philosophy," which is a CD, you know, if you remember what those are, of best bits. It's like a compilation again of his best bits. And they blew my mind that someone was talking about this. And that was it. I went on a bit of a deep dive. You know, I got Revelations on DVD. I still have it. And I sort of, you know, think back to Bill Hicks every now and then, and sort of, especially at times like now when the world is in chaos and things have gone crazy. Like, what would Bill think about this? You know, he's one of those comedians you do think, oh, what would he be thinking? And he'd probably be laughing his ass off at some of the things that Bill, you know, big old Donald Trump's coming out with. Like, he would be ripping him to shreds. But I also think he'd be broken-hearted at what is going on in the streets of some of these towns, and that's what's important. That, you know, this voice was taken from us, and it's a real tragedy. And so I honestly think I just wanted to have this show to sort of talk about Bill Hicks. Go check him out. You can find him online. Go on YouTube. There's actually, if you've got Amazon Prime Music, there's 2 of his albums are on there. Yeah, I think there's some stuff on Spotify, but you can find examples of his stuff readily available. Go find him out. You'll notice I've put some fair use, I'm going to call them fair use, snippets into the show, and we're going to finish with a bit of a doozy. But yeah, I just wanted to say, like saying, like, Bill Hicks, legend, cult favourite, speaker of truths, but also a fantastic stand-up comic. I think we're going to come back to this. This has been a one-man show. I've done this sort of with my notes and just wanted to sort of try and see if this works with the right energy to do this topic. So we'll see if I come back to this. But we've got some of the big stuff coming. We did a poll recently, and it was decided that the final retrospective we're going to do for this year is going to be the Back to the Future trilogy. So I'll be bringing somebody on to do that. And couple of other special things coming up. I've got a bit of a mini documentary I've been putting together. That's going to come up before the end of the year as well. And yeah, it's just some Dread related things, and of course Christmas. We're going to be covering Christmas. We'll do a Christmas special. In the meantime, thank you very much. Don't forget to check out previous shows. Don't forget to go check out the sister podcast, 20th Century Geek sister podcast, Stories Out of Time and Space, the sci-fi movie review podcast. Also, if you enjoy what you listen to, you enjoy any of these shows, please, a 5-star rating is appreciated on any podcast catcher that you use. Check us out. We have an Amazon wish list, 20th Century Geek. We're out there. But if you don't want to do that, we have Patreon. We have a Patreon that we have some fantastic patrons, some supporters. I do a monthly podcast, 30-minute thoughts. I put in a poll. They choose what the topic is going to be, and I give my thoughts for 30 minutes. Very much like this, really. And there's that. There's also, you get to choose every quarter one of the shows that I do, much like this. So check out the Patreon. I really appreciate it. Any support, whether it be a review or a full Patreon. Again, thank you very much. As I'm going to say thank you very much, and I'm going to be led out by the great man, Bill Hicks.
The world is like a ride at an amusement park, and when you choose to go on it, you think it's real, because that's how powerful our minds are. And the ride goes up and down and round and round. It has thrills and chills, and it's very brightly colored, and it's very loud, and it's fun for a while. Some people have been on the ride for a long time, and they begin to question, is this real, or is this just a ride? And other people have remembered, and they come back to us, and they say, hey, don't worry, don't be afraid, ever, because this is just a ride, and we kill those people. Shut him up. We have a lot invested in this ride. Shut him up. Look at my furrows of worry. Look at my big bank account and my family. Has to be real. It's just a ride. But we always kill those good guys who try and tell us that. You ever notice that? And let the demons run amok? But it doesn't matter, because it's just a ride. And we can change it anytime we want. It's only a choice. No effort, no work, no job, no savings of money. A choice right now between fear and love. The eyes of fear want you to put bigger locks on your door, buy guns, close yourself off. The eyes of love instead see all of us as one. Here's what we can do to change the world right now to a better ride. Take all that money we spend on weapons and defense each year and instead spend it feeding, clothing, and educating the poor of the world, which it would many times over, not one human being excluded, and we can explore space together, both inner and outer, forever in peace. Thank you very much. You've been great. I hope you enjoyed it. London, you're fantastic.